lovely to see you, and it's a really enormous pleasure to welcome you here tonight to this talk, which is a postponed talk, isn't it? We were supposed to do this in COVID. This was a victim of lockdown, actually.
Yeah.
So it's fantastic to have you here, Michael, at the University of York, and be able to go ahead with this event. And it's, as I say, it's lovely to have you all here. We're here to talk about Michael's book. Michael's great book, one of them, From Albert Square to Parliament Square, and the format for this evening, if it's okay with you, is that I'm going to try and pretend to be a chat show host sitting here. I'll be really bad at it, but I'll try my best, and ask you some questions about the book, Michael, if that's okay, and then hand the questions over to you so that you can ask Michael any questions you've got. So think of your best questions, and we'll get to quick smart. I should have said, sorry, I should introduce myself. I'm Paul Johnson. I used to work here at the University of York for about 10 years. I miss it. It's a great place. Lovely, lovely university, full of great people. And now I work over at the University of Leeds. Sorry,
somebody has to go there.
Someone has to go there. So, I want to give you a very warm welcome to the University of York, but I also want to say before we start, talking about the book, amazing congratulations, because today, after campaigning for I think 7 years, the government announced the extension of the schemes which allow gay people who were really shamefully convicted of terrible homophobic offences in the past. The scheme's often referred to as the Turing scheme, Turing pardons. The government announced an extension of the scheme today to cover all of the offences under which people were convicted, including women. It was previously limited to men, and it was limited to a very narrow set of offences. But today, for the first time, now anyone, including many, many people in the armed forces as well, can apply to have their conviction disregarded and also obtain a pardon. And everyone who was terribly convicted over hundreds and hundreds of years will also be posthumously pardoned today. So Michael campaigned for this for 6 and 7 years. We did work together, but you campaigned for it in Parliament. So thank you very much, and enormous congratulations.
Without this man, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And we worked cross-party because I think it's the best way to work. And as Paul said, it took us 7 years. And the wonderful thing is that people can now begin to claim back part of their lives. And we also need to remember that when the law was decriminalised in 1967, people were still court-martialed according to service discipline. So looking at that and the wonderful report that's now finalised about how people in the armed services were treated means that we begin to give justice to people, and it's extremely important, Paul, as you pointed out. You know, it goes back to 1533, and I don't just mean 33 minutes past 3. And think of those families who can reach back and say, that's what they did to my grandfather, my uncle, my aunt, whatever, and now I can claim back their reputation, claim back our family's dignity, and I think that's really important for a civilised society. But without you, honestly, we couldn't have done it. So thank you, Paul Johnson.
Thank you. That's really kind of you. Anyway, it's your night, so thanks to you. And let's talk about this great book, which I love, and I know loads of people will have read it and love it. And let's start at the beginning of this book. And your childhood. You were born in the East End of London, and you say at the start of the book that the post-war East End was mesmerising and bloody awful. but there wasn't a better place to be alive and poor.
Yeah.
What was it like?
Well, the docks was incredible. Life teeming in and out of the docks. We lived on the edge of Chinatown, the original Chinatown, which was in Poplar. My dad was a docker, my mum was a proud office cleaner. And the fact that everyone was poor, apart from Betty Wood, because her husband was a long-distance lorry driver. So Betty always knew she had a few shillings. So everyone helped one another if you needed a shilling for the gas meter or for the electric meter. And when the rent man would come round, and he'd be banging away on the door, weekly rent he'd collect, banging away on the door, and someone would say, "She's out." And from inside the woman would say, "Yes, I told you I'm out." But there was a sense that we would get through it together, a real sense of belonging. And the joy of playing on the barges. Me and my brothers used to play on the banks of the Thames when the tide went out. Mudlarks. And then you'd be up when the tide was coming up and it was high. There'd be these huge iron barges that were filled with tea chests, and we'd be on those barges jumping from one to the other. The horse and carts that used to stand there being loaded. And my mum, who had a good pair of legs and she knew it, she'd say, "Go down, see if you can get me a cup of tea." And she meant a cup of tea leaves. And we'd go down and we'd go up to the men in the wharf that our council block looked onto. And we'd say, "Have you got any tea for our mum?" And they'd go, "Who's your mum?" "Mary." And she'd be up at the window and she'd go, "Ooh." And they go, "Yeah, we've got tea for your mum." But it was that sense of no matter what happened, you would get through it together. And even though I knew I was different, I knew I was one of them. And a part of me, I knew I had to hide, that he would never belong as I was. Nonetheless, it was busy enough and amazing enough so that you could hide. And I found other ways of hiding, as you know, by pretending to be other people.
But you talk about your mum and your dad a lot in this book, and I remember when you came to the university last year, and the university awarded you an honorary doctorate, which I know you were really proud of, and you were very you were very moved to receive it. And in your acceptance speech, you referred to your mum and dad, and you said, you wouldn't be the person you are now without them. What do they mean to you now? You talk about them a lot. You still think about them a lot.
They were incredible. I look at them and I think, if only they'd had my chances. Both of them really left school at the age of 10, 11. My dad being the eldest son, his father was invalided out of the First World War. Being the eldest son, he was the breadwinner, along with my nan. There was no concept of disability payments. He got a small pension from the government. And I had my dad was fun when he was drunk. And he was a docker, proud docker. As I said earlier, my mum, proud office cleaner. And when I was born, they had 4 sons. My life was mapped out. I would be a docker. He went down, put my name down at the Port Labour Board. Interestingly, if my mum had had 4 daughters, or any daughters, she would have taken them office cleaning, so that they would know what they had to do. Now, my mum must have known I was gay before I did, because she took me office cleaning. She said, "Come on, Mike, come on, get the ashtrays, empty the bins." They were funny. They had a tumultuous relationship. And because of Paul, my late husband, I had a terrible relationship with my dad, because it was always me that stood between him and my mum on those nights when they come back from the pub. And I can see now, I'd be at the crack of the door of our bedroom, and I'd hear him, my dad, calling her all the names. And my brothers used to say, don't, you'll make it worse. And I'd hear the words, and then I knew I had to be in there. And of course I did make it worse. And because of that, I had a really difficult relationship with him. But because of Paul, I got to know the man that his friends saw. I got to know a man who was lost, who didn't fulfill all of his wonderful talents. And with my mum, I got to know this incredible woman who would do anything for her children. It was about survival. And they remain a part of my life. There's a stairwell.
I was just thinking of the stairwell.
Were you?
Yeah.
In the House of Lords, I often take the back route in. When we come out of Westminster Station, we've got a lovely entrance from the station into the Parliament. It's a private entrance. So I dive in that way, and I then take the back corridor, because I'm always waiting for someone with imposter syndrome for them to go, no, not you, we meant the other Michael Cashman, out. And there's a wonderful staircase that I go up, this circular stone staircase. And every time I go up it, I think of my mum, because she used to clean stone staircases like that. And I said to Paul, she would always say, Mike, remember, when you're doing the stairs, you start at the top and you work your way down. No kneeling pads, no marigold gloves, the stench of bleach, which I still love, cold water, and her hands red raw, scrubbing those stairs. And I know that it's because of them I am. I just wish they were around to share some of the things I've got. My dad said, he said, you know what, if you hadn't gone on the stage, you would have ended up in prison. When I'm in the House of Lords, he'd say, you'll definitely end up in prison.
But they really supported you, didn't they? And what's really also very moving is in the book is how you talk about when you really began your acting career as a young boy, as a 12-year-old boy,
yeah.
And you auditioned for Oliver. And your mum took you along to auditions, didn't she? And sort of, helped you get started. And one thing I thought was really interesting was that your dad warned you that the theatre world was full of queers. Yeah. But when you got there, you didn't sort of find them very quickly.
No, I was really disappointed. I heard him say, but I don't want it going on stage. It's full of queers. And inside my head I went, yes! Because I knew I was different. I knew that girls were my friends and boys were our common enemy. I am where I am because of what other people would call failure. Now, I don't believe in failure or the concept of failure. Failure for me is that somebody tried to do something, and because I believe good in people, tried to do something for the better, tried to change something for the better. So that's evidence for me that somebody tried. And so I am where I am because I failed my 11 plus. Didn't know I was taking it. I failed my 11 plus, went to this secondary modern school where, as you rightly say, because of my impersonations, ended up being talent spotted and then going off to meet this blind agent. And he said to his partner, "What's he going to sing?" said the blind agent, looking at the ceiling. "What's he going to sing?" So I said, "Slow Boat to China." So I sang Slow Boat to China, and then everyone looked at the blind agent who was looking at the ceiling, so we all looked at the ceiling, and he said, yes, he'll do, and that was it. I went into Oliver. And there were a few, you know, what we call characters backstage. But for me, the wonderful thing was, Paul, a 45-minute bus ride from the East End of London to a place where I belonged, where I could be me, I could be one of them, and so long as I did my job, turned up, knew the lines in the right order, it was a place where you could belong, and discovered Soho in the 1960s, 1963. Again, I was forever living in a world that was expanding, but of course there was a dark side, which I reveal in the book.
You do, and you say that when you know, as a young person, you discovered the London gay scene, and you said it did feel like you died and gone to heaven, because you found people like you,
yes,
other ones of them. But there was a dark side too. Do you want to talk about that? You talk about it in the book.
In Oliver, used to come out, when you arrived at the stage door, there was a plethora of older men trying to engage you in conversation. And the older boys very quickly gave the vocabulary to tell them to fuck off. And so you kind of do all that. And it was banter, you know. And then an agent, a manager, got in touch with my parents and said, and I was introduced to him, and said, I want Michael to appear in a charity show that I do every Saturday. He's got 3 weeks off, so he'll come to Hounslow on the Friday night, stay with me and my wife and my family, and then he'll do the show, and then the next day I'll bring him back. And my parents went, okay. It's a strange world to them. And I arrived at Hounslow Station. There he was, jacket, belted tight so even air couldn't get into it, his briefcase. And he said, hello son, took my hand and led me off, and we went into a cafe for a meal. And then after that, led me down these streets that were dark with more trees than I'd ever seen in my life. And he knocked on this door. There was no wife and no family. It was a boarding house. And the landlady said, oh, so you're his son, he's so proud of you. I was in a world where adults were lying, and I didn't know how I could own the truth. And there were 2 beds, and I went to my bed. On that night, he sexually abused me, and I found a switch in my head that a lot of people find, and I turned the switch on, so I was safe. And then engineered it so that went on for 3 years. And that's why I'm passionate about relationship and sex education, because I wish I had the vocabulary to be able to tell someone what somebody was doing to me. I wish I knew which relationships were appropriate or not. And interestingly, I then lost contact with him because I grew out of my pubescence. He was attracted to boys below the age of 15. And I was in Scarborough, where I know Nick and Carol from. And And I was in Scarborough, walking home one night after the first night of, I think it was a trip to Scarborough. I went up, first thing I went to do. And I was walking along Happy Valley Road, just under Suicide Bridge. And I spotted this man on the other side of the road. It was dark, with a dog. And this voice went, "Mickey?" And it was him. And I lived on Royal Avenue that came down? On Royal Avenue. The penultimate house on Royal Avenue is where I had a flat with Sandra, lovely Sandra Bruff, who loved playing the organ with her headphones on so nobody else could hear it. You'd be banging away at the door and you'd never get in. And her house was there, and the house that he lived in backed onto our rear garden. And so I met him, and met his other son. And I often wondered, did my parents never guess? They allowed me to go and live with him because he engineered it so that I went to a stage school. Maybe they did, but maybe they didn't have the language, the vocabulary. I know my dad didn't like him because he didn't like a drink. My mum loved him because he shared his cigarettes with her. Yeah.
But I mean, one of the things that you're really passionate about is owning your own story. And you've said this many times, you say it in Parliament, but you've said it in other ways, about owning your own space in the world, I think you say, and being able to articulate all your experiences, and for you that's really freeing, isn't it?
Yes. If you don't, you know, life is a mosaic. If you don't own all the colours, you can't be the complete person. It's why I'm passionate about people being who they are. If the box doesn't fit, don't remain in it. The wonderful thing when you come out as a gay man or a trans person, or come out as someone who doesn't want to be a part of anything, you own your own space in the world, and not the space that is loaned to you by you pretending to be somebody else. And that for me is so important, and it empowers me. When I see somebody's identity being defamed, misrepresented, somebody being othered, I always say, imagine. Stand in the shoes of that person and imagine. You know, we're dealing with a terrible bill. Even my friends in the Conservative Party consider it a terrible piece of legislation, the illegal migration bill, and I'm using this just as an illustration, Paul. And I know I go on, so tell me to shut up. But within this bill, it represents people who are seeking refuge, seeking asylum, seeking safety, represents them as a threat to our society. And I say to them, imagine you are that woman with her child and her tall, spindly 20-year-old son behind her, about to step into that dinghy and cross the channel. A journey that has probably taken you a year already. Imagine that is you. And if what happens to them you wouldn't want to happen to you, then how dare we allow it to happen to anybody else?
Yeah.
And that is about the owning of space, and allow others to own their space. I do go on.
You do. In a great way. You said about finding refuge, and I want to take you back to Scarborough 1983, which I think is your refuge, really. And that's the year and the place in which you were invited to a party hosted by Barbara Windsor. And at that party you met a Butlins redcoat, didn't you? Named Paul. And that was a really life-changing moment for you. Can you tell us about that? And
I can see it. I can. Barbara, it was the end of the season, end of the summer season, and Barbara was in the mating game at the Floral Hall. And Barbara sent round an invite, I've still got it, to Miss Barbara Windsor's grand soiree at the Butlins Grand Hotel. And I thought, oh, that sounds good. And when I saw the Butlins redcoat, who was coming around with the invitations, who completely ignored me, I thought, oh, it's even now, I might go. And I went, and as I went in the front door, I was doing a late night show. And Eddie Lipscomb, our wonderful designer, Eddie said he'd come with me. And I thought, oh, do I want to go? It's late. And as I went to go in, somebody went to take our photograph. And our husband said, no, it can't be anything. They've rolled up red carpet. So she didn't take my photograph. And there was Barbara. She went, oh, hello, darling. I said, oh, she said, I'm so glad you came. She said, I think I've got one for you. I said, pardon? She said, I think I've got one of yours. She said, I've been after him all season. I can't get anywhere. And cut a long story short, I met Paul. And he was 13 years younger than me. I had to fight off a woman in her, an actor in her 30s. She went, this is my red coat. I'm sorry. And that was the start of 31 brilliant years. 31 years of his patience, his tenacity, because the Cashmans suffer from not feeling we should be loved, and that if you are loved, then somebody has to hurt you. And we nearly split up, and we talked honestly about our relationship. And we had this most incredible relationship where he taught me that I was worthy of being loved and that I could love without getting hurt. And my God, he lived life. He died at the age of 50. But somebody said, and that was 9 years ago, a friend of ours said, she said, you know, I've always believed that people shouldn't die when they die. She said, but now I look at Paul, she said, I believe that when you're born, you're only given so much life. And he lived it all. But boy did he suffer the time in EastEnders when he was outed on the centre pages of the News of the World to his family and friends, when the brick came through the window. And as he said, it's interesting, the tabloids are only interested in a gay relationship as a scandal. Because once it was known and it was out, and remember, we're talking about the years of AIDS and HIV, when to be gay was to be synonymous with HIV, and we were depicted as AIDS carriers. It was called the gay plague. And the tabloids would tell him, the photographers, to get out of the photograph. Now when it was a scandal, in there. But as a relationship, a committed relationship, not interested at all.
And this, I mean, this whole book really is a testament to your great love together. It's deeply moving. in that way.
Is it funny as well?
It's extremely funny as well. It is very, very moving, and I know anyone that reads it finds it very moving in that way. One thing I wanted to ask you was, you lost Paul 9 years ago, and I mean that's a strange phrase, lost, because I know he's very present in your life every day, and you think and talk about him. But one thing you've done over the last 9 years is to be very public about your very profound grief. It has made you desperately unhappy at times. You've missed him tremendously. Why has it been so important for you to be very public on social media, about your grief?
Well, first of all, because he matters so much. Death makes absolute sense to the dying. It's those of us who are left that try to make sense of what is to us nonsense. It's the physical absence. I mean, I talk to him all the time, and luckily, because I can impersonate, he answers back. In the morning, I say, shall we get up? I look at his painting on the wall. Shall we get up, Babs? Come on, let's do that. My love for him hasn't stopped. And also I think it's extremely important to be open about what you experience. If you share grief, you allow somebody else to come in to your space and perhaps for them to share theirs. You learn very quickly a language, a shorthand. Somebody said to me the other, lovely Sheila Hancock, she said, darling Cash, we've joined a club we didn't want to belong to. And so that's why, Paul, it's important. And also it's important that people realise that actually it's not lesbian, gay, bisexual, non-binary, trans, gender fluid. What defines us is love. And I've lived through most of my life, whereas a gay man, I've only been defined through perceived sexual activity. And I resent that. Hopefully we are born in love, and if we can live through love, and certainly the love of one another, then we change for it and by it. We are forever changed by love. And that's my DNA changed over years. Yeah.
And you mentioned EastEnders, and of course that's, for many people, that is how they know you. That's how they would have first seen you, because in those days we all watched EastEnders, didn't we? We all... I'm looking for older faces, actually. we all watched EastEnders. It's certainly the first time I ever saw you, and I remember the 1987 kiss as if it was yesterday. And that was a life-changing moment for you and for Paul, wasn't it? I mean, it really was. It changed your lives as well as changing the national conversation.
Yeah, it did. It changed our lives. Not the least, it changed our lives in many respects for the better, brought many benefits, many intrusions. As I said, the brick and the News of the World put the location of our address with that headline. I can see it now. Secret gay love of AIDS scare East Ender. And when the brick came through the window. And it checked. I'm just about to say, I think if I hadn't gone into EastEnders and played that part and reacted to the anti-lesbian and gay law that came in 1987-88, I wouldn't have had the life I've had now in terms of going into politics and ending up in the House of Lords. And it dramatically changed the activism that I got involved in. You know, I nearly called the book The Accidental Activist, because I didn't set out to say, right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to challenge the law, because that was the deception that is created by commercial opportunities. I don't want to get too professorial. That we kind of convinced ourselves in the lesbian and gay community that we were okay, that we had freedom, because in the 70s and 80s we had our pubs, our clubs, our bars, and in some instances our saunas. And it was Section 28 that came in. Yes, after the decriminalisation, partial decriminalisation, interestingly, the arrests went up, as you know. And through entrapment, you were arrested for importuning, soliciting, behaviour likely to cause a breach of the peace, and a whole range of other offences, which are now no longer offences, and people can be rightly pardoned and a conviction wiped clean. And it was Section 28 that woke us all up. AIDS and HIV, and then Section 28, the anti-lesbian and gay law that Margaret Thatcher's government brought in. And the reason I say being in EastEnders and Section 28 was because Paul and I came back from Key West, which I was regaling you and Rob with earlier, and I won't regale you with that now, but it's in the book. And when I read about this new law, and I couldn't believe it. And there was a march, and I knew I had to be on that march against it. And I didn't tell anyone. And I was down to rehearse that day on Saturday. And my scenes were with Wendy Richard, who played Pauline, and June Brown, who played Dart. So I said, June, what's that, Mike, dear? I said, June, I need an hour, a couple of hours off. Oh yeah, why is that, dear? I said, well, there's a march in, so I explained it, there was a march in London. So June said, don't worry, I'll go. She fixed it with the director, got me 2 hours off, but I had to go down into London from Elstree and come back. I went down, got on the march, as I went, June went, don't get arrested, dear. Off I went, down on the march, and at the beginning of the march, microphone, and that night I'm on the news, and my dad evidently said to my mum, I don't mind him being gay, but does he have to go on the bleeding news about it? And that was the start of the activism, the campaign for equality, because the interesting thing was we had AIDS and HIV, and it was a death sentence. To be HIV positive was to face death. Week after week, people were dying with stigma and discrimination. And instead of getting love and support from a government, or indeed just love and succour, we had this legislation that was there to force us underground. And the incredible thing was, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And we said, do you want to fight? We'll give you a fight. And interestingly, Margaret Thatcher, her government, the title of Clause 28, as we called it, Section 2A of the Local Government Act, was to ban the promotion of homosexuality. I wished you could promote it. I tried with a lot of men. And the danger about this clause was, it said local authority shall not promote homosexuality. Ian McKellen, through lobbying, managed to get in the word intentionally, which was a key word. Local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality, nor the acceptance of homosexual relations as a pretend family relationship. So we couldn't even be seen as a pretend family, let alone any other relationship. And if a local authority couldn't do that, and a local authority had a theatre or a concert hall, couldn't do the works of Genet, the sonnets of Shakespeare, couldn't do a concert by Tchaikovsky. And so the amazing thing was the LGBT community, as such communities that there are, rose up against it, but so did all of the allies who went, hang on, this is censorship, this is an attack upon us. And interestingly, Margaret Thatcher, that day, with that government, started the fight for LGBT equality. She empowered us to fight back, and we set up Stonewall, and we lost the battle. Section 28, it became law, and campaigned for equality. So yeah, it's all of those changes happened because of being in EastEnders.
Yeah, it's certainly the start of your very long journey. And year after year, you're still horrified by legislation that's being passed, and you're still on marches, and you're still campaigning.
I am, yes.
And I could carry on asking you questions and talking to you for hours and hours and hours, but I think we have to ask our friends now if they've got any questions.
Or comments.
Or comments, or anything. So I'm going to hand over to our friends here to ask.
The chairman of the board, hello. My dad, until he passed in 2011, never forgot you being the chairman of the board.
Oh my goodness.
Ever you were on the television. He'll never want for a job. He's so good. And we feel exactly the same as to our sons. And I think that you might have been able to have, I don't know, because acting's difficult and writing isn't, but maybe a bit easier life than you set yourself. But you didn't take an easy option. You carried on and did what you did. And from 2008 till 2018, I had a wonderful job working at a land-based college, further and higher education, just along the road down there. And I had a lot of students, an awful lot of students. And I'm so glad to be able to tell you that all the problems are brought to me, because I was an angel, that was what I was. None of them concerned their sexuality, because they were all accepted and happy and content with that within the college, because there was not a problem. They had loads of problems of their own making, and they forgot why they signed up to do the course. But because of you and all the others like you, paving the way, making their life an acceptable life, it was wonderful.
Well, Carol, thank you.
I mean it, absolutely. You are the chairman of the board.
Chairman of the
you
board
should be.
It was Seven Deadly Virtues, wasn't it?
It was.
Written by Alan Ayckbourn from the 3 years I was in Scarborough. And as ever with Alan, he takes something and gives you a completely different take on it. And there was this scene where I'm the chairman of the board wearing a bowler hat with red horns coming through it as Satan. And I remember, and it was Paul Todd did the music.
He did.
Yeah. And it was an incredible piece. And I remember, I suddenly was. What's the jazz when you sing over the notes? And is it scat singing?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Alan said to me afterwards, he went, Cash. He used to call me and Paul Cash and Carry. He said, Cash, that scat singing was incredible. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, I'll do it again tomorrow. And he went, you won't. And he was absolutely right. It's one of those things that happen in live performance. But Carol, you saying that about when you were at the college, that is what gives me strength about the future. That younger generations just get on with their lives. You know, there is still discrimination that people face. There's discrimination in other parts of the world, and that should affect us and concern us as much as when it happens locally. But you know, with that discrimination, what I like is people's attitudes have changed through information and education and sharing. And we have nothing to fear from one another. What we have to fear are lawbreakers. I'm a great, as you know, you've had me say it before, I believe in equality, because equality is based on the concept of the equal protection of the law and the equal obligation to abide by the law. And therefore, we must never allow, certainly with minorities, an individual or individuals from a minority being represented in politics or the media as representing that entire minority. Because otherwise we're back to the 1930s. I'm glad, I'm sorry to hear your dad passed, but I'm glad your dad remembered. Chairman of the board. Patrick.
First of all, thank you very much for really engaging, really inspiring responses to Paul's fantastic questions. Great chat show hosting. I would watch it.
Thank you, Patrick.
I think my question is around your experience kind of with activism and gay rights activism and pride and that kind of stuff when it was still very much, I'd say, protest oriented.
Yes.
Particularly talking about in light of Section 28. And I'm interested to know what you think about Pride today. We see, say, London Pride is becoming incredibly commercialised. We have a lot of prides like York, like Exeter, these kind of smaller cities where it's very family friendly. And not necessarily that there are issues with that, but I'd be interested to know from you whether you think Pride has lost that key activism and protest that was so integral to gay rights
Okay.
in the past.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was done. I just left it up for my sentence there. I thought I should probably add that.
In the book, I refer to the first Pride March that I went on towards the late 70s. And there were about 500 of us gathered at Marble Arch, all pretending we didn't know one another until up went a banner that said we're here and we're queer. And then we all came together like this large family, surrounded by 1,000 police. I think the police were there more to protect the crowd from us, because that was the way a collection of lesbians and gay men and supporters were seen. We were a threat. And off we marched down Oxford Street, shouting proudly, "We're here, we're queer, and we're not going shopping." Although when we went past Selfridges, we lost quite a few. And it was so small, we ended up at the University of London Union in Mallet Street, and it was protest. People were bemused about what we were doing. Interestingly, when Section 28 happened, the Pride marches grew, they swelled. I think the first Pride march after Section 28, or during Section 28, there were about 10,000 people. And Ian McKellen, I've known Ian 50 years, I think. There's a lovely reference in the book when we first meet. I meet him at a dinner party, and then subsequently I'm at the Royal Shakespeare Company with him, and my agent says, "Go remind Ian that you..." And I said, "Hello Ian, it's Michael Cashman." He went, "Yes." Years later, he told me why, and you'll have to read the book to find out. Anyway, so we, as the marches grew in size, Ian used to say, "Why isn't it more commercial? Why, when we go past that building, there isn't a sign saying welcome? Why isn't when we go past that theatre?" Now we see that, and I welcome the commercialisation of Pride for a simple reason. It says to politicians and others who might not want to be welcoming and open and inclusive, it says to them, the multiplicity of who we are, but the organisations that are supporting us. So Ernst & Young, whatever, their link into whichever political party, for me, is an important message. And I also think that Pride is still a protest. There are people on the streets who don't want to see us there. There are people actively campaigning in this country to take our rights away. And my good friend Peter Tatchell and I share a different view. He says, no, it's too commercial. Of course, it may be too commercial for him, but I want that commercial pride, that party, so that on the back of pride we can lobby and use it politically. And it doesn't stop others, like the other pride, Black Pride, that said, we feel underrepresented, so Lady Phil said, right, we'll organise Black Pride. And I just think we can build on what we have, and there should be a wonderful mix. I have long argued that Pride should actually start, for instance, if it was this year, I would have a group of women and men from Uganda with the Ugandan flag marching in front of Pride, and us celebrating our brothers and sisters around the world who are having their lives threatened. Their life could be taken away. As I said in Parliament this week, someone tells you that they need HIV treatment because of their sexual orientation. That doctor can face 2 years in prison for not passing on the information to the police. So that means that person in need of treatment who's been sent there by the UK government, because we don't want to detain people who are seeking sanctuary in this country. We're going to put them to Rwanda, Uganda. So someone going there who's HIV positive may think, I'm not going to put myself at risk. So, I know I've digressed, but I think there is a way of having protest within. Celebration and protest, because I think it's the great yin and the yang saying, look at what we can get, and look at where they've still got to get it. And remembering actually when we're a Pride March, I know I go on, but Pride March I went on in Romania. When I was in the European Parliament, I used to go off to places like Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, and to support local LGBT people, because they're the ones who dictate what happens. We don't impose it. And I'm reminded of this, Patrick, really, it's so crucial for me. That first march in Bucharest, there were about 200 of us, mainly people from the embassies, and the British ambassador, who, even though he had a walking disability, said no, he was going to walk with us the entire way. He said, once I get rid of Prince Charles at the airport, I'll come and join you. And on that march, we had about 1,000 police armed, water cannons, helicopters hovering. The Orthodox Church was casting us to hell. And at the end of the march, we got into taxis to take us away from the thugs that were there to beat us up. And the next year I went, and somebody from the embassy said, Michael, I want you to meet this couple with their daughter. And they stood there and they had this little sign in Romania. And the embassy guy said, this says, we are proud of our lesbian daughter. The year before, they had stood on the pavement and watched. They didn't have the courage. That's why Pride matters. Because there are still people who feel that they could lose everything. A young man I met recently can't come out because of the job he does, because of the fear that he has about what his parents might say. It might not be perfect, but sometimes perfection is the enemy of positive change. But that's just my opinion.
Other comments, questions? Yes.
And you can say, if you have a question, can I have a short answer?
I just want to say, my best friend Henry, he's gay, and he's been out for the longest I know lots of queer people, but he's been, out the longest. He was the first kind of person in like community I'm in to come out. And I just wanted to say a really big thank you, because without your work and without people like you, he wouldn't have, felt safe to come out. He wouldn't have been in a community that would have been accepting of him. And I think that almost because I've grown up, I never, until I started, meeting other people and realizing, oh, there's some people who don't accept gay people, like, it wasn't right there. And I think sometimes my generational people, my age, they take it for granted how many people, they don't realize how many people, gave their lives to just fight for the right to be themselves. I love my friend Henry. He's the best person I've ever met, and I just wanted to say, a really big thank you for being someone who helped him, be able to be who he is. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, Nell, thank you, and I'm sure Henry thinks you are as amazing as you think he is. I just... Two things really that spring to mind. The courage of the BBC during the 1980s, when the dark period. When I went into the show, they tried to cast a straight actor, right, because it would be easier for the actor. And so when I went into the show, the headline on the front of the Sun was EastEnders. When we had the kiss, it was filth underneath, get this off our TV. So I want to pay enormous tribute to the courage of the BBC in doing what they did, standing by it. Because when I was in the show and it was revealed that a gay character was in the show, there were calls for the character to be axed because it was before 8 o'clock in the evening. They said it shouldn't be in a family show. When we had the kiss, they went berserk. It was a peck on the forehead, a goodbye peck. And the tabloid reaction. So the BBC, Julia Smith, the original producer, and Tony Warren, the co-creator with her, showed amazing strength and resilience. And so I want to pay tribute to them, because it was that openness, it was the destroying of stereotype. And people realise, actually, if you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, heterosexual, it's just a part of you. And you are as mundane and as wonderful and as boring as everybody else. And you haven't got two heads. And actually, you know what? You want to get on with your life and be loved. And that brings me to the second point I want to make, which you actually made, about people who gave their lives. I never forget that what has been achieved in terms of equality and what needs to be defended, because it's under attack in culture wars. What we need to be reminding ourselves is that it wasn't my generation that achieved it. It's been achieved across thousands of generations of women and men who had the courage to stand up and say, no, you cannot do that. You're talking about me, you're talking about my friend, you're talking about my son, my daughter. They stood up over thousands of generations and gave their livelihoods, their liberty, and as you rightly said, in some instances, their lives. And it's because of them that we now see the realization of rights. And it's because of them we have to say to younger generations, enjoy it, love it, embrace it, push it out to its extremes, but remember, it can all be taken away from you. And remember, just go and see Cabaret, that if you were rich enough as a gay man in England in the 1930s, you could escape the intolerance here by going to live in Berlin, where life was amazing. And it's a wonderful reminder that darkness can suddenly be as quick or quicker than light. Defend it. But thank you.
That was a wonderful note to finish on. I want to thank you for coming to York. You're amazing. We think you're amazing, and we're so happy to have listened to you. I want to thank the University of York, which I'll say again is an amazing institution. And Michael, you talked there about culture wars, and you talked about the defence of rights and liberties and freedoms. A university like the University of York is one of the last great institutions in the United Kingdom.
Wonderful.
Doing great things, a university for public good. So thank you to the University of York, and thank you ever so much for coming.
And thank you. You didn't tell the story about the ferret.
I'll save that one for next time. You can buy Michael's book outside if you want to buy it, if you don't already have it, and he'll sign it, and he'll talk to you outside. Well, you do go on.